What's up, gang? Welcome to The Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Terris Background. I'm so pumped to have you here with me. Now listen, The Greatness Machine, we're about two things. Number one, people who are living their passions. And number two, those who are creating greatness in the world and doing both of these things despite the odds against them. Each episode, we're going to feature interviews with game changers, business leaders, telling us their origin stories, what made them tick, what got them to where they are now. Why? So it can help you step into your greatness within your life, your business, and your career. Occasionally, you might hear a few solo episodes from myself, moi, as I say, as I leverage my 20 years of entrepreneurship as a CEO and founder to help you grow and level up in your journey to scale your life and your business. So come be a fly on the wall, enjoy the conversation, and I'm stoked to have you here with me. Guys, welcome to today's episode of The Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Terris Background, and boy, do we have a special guest. Terri Kallsen is in the house. What's up, Terri?
Hey, Darius. Good morning.
Oh my gosh. I've had like 4 cups of coffee, so I'm ready to roll. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day out here in San Francisco, and I've been looking forward to this for a long time.
Oh my gosh. You and me alike, sister. I'm so happy to have you here. Do you mind if I give a little bit of like our background, and then I'd love to give your formal bio for our audience, then we'll get going on the show. Is that cool?
Sounds perfect.
So you guys, Terri is not only a guest on the show today, but she is my business partner at Rise. And she's what we call, there's a formal title for what she is. It's a freaking badass. And so I'm so lucky to get to work with Terri. We've worked together now for almost a year. I think we're at a year right now. Is that correct?
That's right.
Is this our like work partnership anniversary?
Yeah,
I think so.
Where's your anniversary gift for me, my friend?
It's the show. This is like, I'm throwing flowers at you. So we worked together for almost a year, and I will tell you guys, Terri is like one of my favorite people I've ever worked with, and she's just such an amazing human. And early on, like when we started working together, I was like, man, I want to get her on the show. I mean, you've done so many amazing things in your career and in life, and I just thought it would be such a gift to share it with the audience. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so honored to have you here.
My pleasure.
So I'm going to give you guys her formal bio because I'm going to be gushing on for most of the show, but I'm so excited to have Terri here for a lot of reasons. But I want to give the formal bio, and this is a little different. A lot of times, usually we have people with like really massive entrepreneurial backgrounds, but every now and again we get a stud like Terri who has a really huge corporate background and has just done amazing things in her industry, which is now in my industry, which is in the wealth management industry. But as I mentioned, Terri is an entrepreneur. She's an advisor for CEOs and managing partner at Rise Growth Partners. She runs all of our operating partnerships as well as many other things at the firm. Previous to Rise, she was the head of retail for Charles Schwab, had over 7,000 employees under her direction, and managed $1.6 trillion in assets under management. After that, she was the COO of Wealth Enhancement Group and grew that firm from $19 billion to $65 billion in assets under management in just 3 years. Currently, she's the chairperson-elect for the CFP board. And in 2019, this is pretty cool. She was honored as the San Francisco Financial Woman of the Year. Wow, that's a mouthful. So I look, Terri, I know like everyone always, there's like this quote I love, which is like success has many fathers, but failure is an orphan. And it's very, it's easy for me to talk about your successes. And I know we're going to be talking about all the ups and downs in your career, but would love if you, here at the Greatness Machine, we love origin stories. Would love if you could give us some of your origin story. Like, how did you get to where you got to?
Sure. Well, I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My parents worked full time. I was a latchkey kid, Darius. I have an older sister and a younger brother. And, during that time, it wasn't that common that both parents were working. And so I saw the work ethic of my parents. My father was a teacher and my mother worked as an executive admin for really good companies in the Wisconsin area. But when I went to school on the bus by myself with my sister, but my parents weren't there, and then dropped off and, had to finish our homework in the afternoon. And my mother always called at about 3:15, 3:30 to make sure we were home okay, and then got us started peeling potatoes or boiling noodles for spaghetti or chicken or whatever. I mean, we worked to make sure everyone got their jobs done. And that was how I was raised, with a very strong work ethic. Then I went in high school, played a lot of sports, and women's sports, I think, really create a sense of healthy competition, of camaraderie, of teamwork and collaboration. Went on to play volleyball in college. I went to an all-women's Catholic college, which again, when you go to an all-women's college, the women have to step up and be the president and be the treasurer and help with the finances. And that was just normal, right? There were no men in the room to do it. And so I wasn't raised in a sense that I had to be a leader, but there were always opportunities. And so I took them. And then from there, my first role out of college was at 3M in St. Paul, Minnesota. And during that time, I learned how diverse the world is, right? I mean, I grew up in Milwaukee, went to school in Minnesota, but really learned the value of diversity working for a company that had over 120,000 employees back in the 90s. And during the day in the hallways, you would see people from all over the world. And I'd never experienced that before. So it really broadened my mind and helped open up the opportunities for me. And then I got married. My husband and I have been married for 31 years, Scott Kallsen. And he was offered a job in a different city during that time. We both had really good careers. So we moved for his job at first. And then I got a new job in financial services because I had a very analytical background. So that's how I ended up in financial services. I took all the exams. I worked with clients at a company called Thrivent Financial and then just kept going. I loved it. It was analytical. It was trustworthy. It was relationship oriented. And then I worked at USAA. But I mean, it started out with two things, really work ethic, commitment, and really being open-minded to what the possibilities are through those experiences, which brought me here today.
I love that. And so, it's funny, as you were just talking about your experience, growing up, just it was interesting. I thought of a couple things. First of all, from a values perspective. I mean, I grew up in a family where we worked, right? There was always something to do. We were the gardener, we were the washing the cars, it was me and my brother and my sister, and in the summers I worked for my dad. It sounds like that was a really important part of your family heritage. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, it's funny. My parents, we lived in a suburb and we had a pretty large backyard. We were middle class all the way. But we had a very large garden. My parents loved to garden and, it was sustainable and sustainable wasn't as cool back then as it is now. It wasn't cool to have a garden, but my parents would have us out there, after school or on weekends weeding the garden. It was a very large garden. I mean, it took up a quarter of our entire yard. My parents grew everything. And so one day I was out there weeding and I thought the green beans were weeds. And so I pulled literally all the green beans. And then I quickly lost that job. My mother just reminded me of that the other day. She's like, "Do you remember when you went out to the garden, you picked all the green beans?" And I was like, well, maybe I meant to do that. But then I was fired from the gardening job and had to do more of the vacuuming and the house cleaning and the car washing, like you said. But I mean, I worked very young, early on. I worked at our school cleaning up, helping after school. I worked at a dry cleaners as well. And then, throughout high school, I babysat in the summers. I mean, I did everything possible. And, with my parents, that's what they expected. And, we were very fortunate. We took a vacation every year. We drove to Florida from Wisconsin. We did not fly because we couldn't afford it. But my parents were always there. They always supported us. They provided, and we didn't know any better. And so, those are the things that taught me to be most grateful in life. And luckily, I still have my parents. My dad turns 88 in a week, wow. And my mother is 84, and they are still working hard. They're still having fun. They're living the dream, in my opinion, and I admire what they've accomplished in their life, just as my sister and my brother. And, I couldn't be more grateful for my family situation.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's, as you were talking earlier too, I had a former guest on the show, Gabby Reese, the former pro volleyball player, beach volleyball player, and she said something that you just reminded me of, which she said, I'm a person that always raised my hand. And it was funny when she said that. I'm like, oh my God, that's me. It annoys some groups I'm in because I'm always like, who wants to go first? So I'm like, me. like one of my CEO groups, they're like, Darius, we know Darius wants to go first. And I'm like, so I've always just been a hand raiser. I'm like, I want to go first. It's like, I don't know. I'm called to do it. How you seem to me like you're a hand raiser. Tell me your thoughts about that.
Well, I think it goes back to my origin story, as you mentioned, is that I am always open to the next big idea, the next big thing, the next step in my life. And that is raising your hand, but it's also just filling a gap. Wherever there's a gap, I step in and I try to fill it, be it for myself, my family, my friends, my coworkers, because I want to keep us moving. Like the best thing we can do, even if we make mistakes along the way or have bumps and bruises, is to just keep going. And, I think one of the best examples of that is if I go back to my undergrad, um, you know, I had to apply for an internship my junior year, and I applied at 3M. It was a free internship, right? I didn't get paid for it, but no one else in my class or anyone around me thought of applying at 3M. But I was always intrigued by that company, and it was so innovative, and I just really felt like I needed to be there in St. Paul. And the college I went to, the College of St. Benedict, is in St. Cloud or in that area. And it's about an hour and a half away, but I applied. I went to interview. My professor looked at me like, I don't think this is going to work, but go for it. No one else had ever done this. And so I went and I applied. I got the internship. I worked there all summer, and it was one of the best experiences of my life. Had I not raised my hand or stepped in to do that, I would not be where I am today. I wouldn't have the mindset of innovation and openness, because what I saw there was fascinating. It was during that time, and this is going to age me a little bit, Darius, but that's when the Post-it note was created. And I remember being in the room, like Hamilton, right? I was in the room. I was not an innovator at the time. I was too low on the totem pole. But I remember Art Fry, his name was Art Fry. He came out with this piece of paper that stuck to things but didn't stick. And remember, 3M at the time was all about adhesives, the best adhesives in the world. And this was a product failure at the time. It was a complete failure, but they recognized through the hymnals in their church that this had an application for use. And I was there and I couldn't believe it. It was just, it was as amazing as anything else to feel like, wow, this is a new product innovation that will literally change the way people work. And that mindset really stuck with me. I was 23, 24, 25, watching this incredible innovation. That's just one example. They used to have employee events where you could go around and test all their failures or products, and we tested everything. And I just love that idea. And maybe Darius, that was a sign at some point in my career I could become an entrepreneur, right? Like when I met you and Joe and team, you were all entrepreneurs. And that was something I always had in the back of my mind. I want to be there. I want to innovate. I want to create. And so I think that experience itself and my ability to step up, as you said, or raise my hand, gave me that mindset that brought me through later in my career.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like when you were just talking about that, another thing that I thought just struck me is even the perspective you just had around that was a failure initially, right? This is like by the way, I'm like literally one of the biggest fans of Post-it notes like in the world. Like you know this because of me with my big Post-its, but you don't see around my desk. I'm like a Post-it hanging things up person. So thank you so much for being in the room when that happened. I hope you made it happen even more. But like this idea of failure, though, and we glossed. I went over the high notes in your career. Obviously, starting off as an intern at 3M and then moving into wealth, and really moving up to the top of the food chain in that world. This is a massive world, managing thousands and thousands of employees. That doesn't happen overnight. Like, and that doesn't happen just because you're a good steward of relationship. That happens because you're taking on risk, putting yourself in a position of potential failure and overcoming. And I'm assuming that it wasn't, it just wasn't a straight path to the top. Tell us a little bit about your perspectives on like your career and how you've, I guess, leveraged failures to become better, because I have to assume that was part of the story.
Well, absolutely. When you're innovative and you're trying new things, and I learned that again at 3M, is you should expect failures, but you learn from those failures and you really redefine what failure means. And so, in my career, after I left 3M, I got into financial services. And during that time, there was a lot going on. I took all my exams. I was working with clients. I was helping with financial planning. And the company I was with was going through a very large merger at the time. And for some reason, one of the key leaders asked me to be a part of the team that would help with the merger. And remember, I was probably in my early 30s, and they told me you have to sign all these documents that say you cannot share this with your husband, your family, anything. And so I was like, okay, I was open again. And we worked on this team to create this merger, and it worked. And so maybe this is another telltale sign of my future. It was the first M&A work I had ever done. I really didn't fully understand it, but I loved the process to get there, because we were taking two firms that were over 80 years old, right?
Wow.
This was, if you think about it, this was the beginning. And I don't know how much the audience knows about financial services, but there were two firms. They were called AAL, Aid Association for Lutherans, and Lutheran Brotherhood, that were in the Midwest. These are Fortune 200 firms. These are not tiny little firms. These firms were actually designed when immigrants came to this country over 150 years ago. These firms were formed to support each other. They're called fraternals. So long story short, we brought two massive firms together. And during that time, I knew AAL very well. I didn't know Lutheran Brotherhood very well. And I remember standing up with different presentations that didn't work at all for Lutheran Brotherhood, right? I didn't know my audience. I didn't know what their wants and needs were, but somehow I got asked to send this presentation. It was a complete failure. But because the audience was like, that's because remember, this was a M&A merger, and this company was merging with this company. And so we had to make sure we really understood. And I knew the advice platform, I knew the financials, but I didn't know those clients' needs. Even though they were similar, they were uniquely different in their brand proposition. And so they gave me that feedback, and I felt bad. But then I thought, well, it's a good time to learn, because this relationship is going to last for a long time. So I went back, worked with my team, came back. And you know what? When I spent time with them later, we were as close as we ever could be. We trusted each other. We believed in each other, and the merger came together. But in any team, as you know, Darius, you're going to form, then you're going to storm, right? And storming is a natural part of the process. That's not a failure. That's not a problem. It's a way to understand each other. And then you norm, which you bring those norms together, and then you perform. And in this particular failure, I learned that storming process very well, which helped me understand how to form and then how to perform much better. And we did. We came together. The results were fantastic. The merger worked. And I worked there for over 11 years. I mean, it worked beautifully. And I'm grateful for that.
That's such a cool story. And it's funny, as you were just talking about that. I mean, I think a lot of leaders, many of our audience are leaders. And, if you're at a different stage in your business, I think people, obviously the forming and the storming is the beginning part. And then, the norming and performing, I think when people get into a later part of a project, they're at that last part where they're just kind of consistently showing up, and everyone knows kind of what they're doing. And unless you bring someone new in the organization, it's kind of like steady as they go, right? But when you're starting a new project, or when you are building a new company, some of our entrepreneurs have exited their companies that are listeners of the show, and they're starting a new project. I've seen this many times with a lot of my friends. We're a new business ourselves, so we're kind of in various parts of those stages. What do you think helped you going through that storming and getting into that norming? Because it can be a little volatile when you're in the storming part, and it doesn't feel great. If you're not especially if you're competitive, if you're not winning, you're not getting what you want. Like, how did you navigate that part?
Yeah, I can share a pretty important example in my career. When I started at Charles Schwab, I started leading their private client group. And so what that meant is I was in charge of about 400 CFPs in various parts of the country. We had many geographical locations, and we provided the financial planning, and the non-discretionary investment advice for thousands of Schwab clients. But we were part of a team that supported the branches. So that was my very first job there. And that was a fabulous job. We did financial planning, we did holistic estate planning, tax planning, and investment planning. So what you can think of it is, I always love the Verizon commercial when you have the advisor out front, right? So the financial advisor is out front. And then in the Verizon commercial, you have one person on the cell phone. There's like 100 people behind them. So that's what Schwab Private Client did. We had the advisor out front. We had about 100 and some people behind him or her supporting them in their role. So that job was just, I got to go out to the branches. I got to learn from them. I got to understand them. So that's key. Know who your audience is and understand what their needs are. But then I moved to running all the branches fairly quickly, about 2.5 years. So I had 350 branches across the country and 5 international. And so what did I do then? I went out to all the branches. That was key, that I need to go out, understand what their capabilities were, understand what's working in the world and what's not, and come back with a plan and then deliver on that plan. That has to happen. You can't just ask but not deliver. But here's where the really interesting part came in. About a year later, I was promoted to head of all retail, as you said. So in a very short amount of time, I moved from the head of private client to the head of the branches to the head of retail. And so what happened then is all my peers were with me. Some worked at Schwab for, 15, 20 years. Some worked there 5 years. But now I became their boss, essentially. So you can imagine the dynamics there, right?
Sure.
This person comes in 4 years later. She's now my boss. I really liked her as my peer. I'm not sure I ever saw her as my boss. That's perfectly normal. So what did I do? Because, now we had a whole new team. And by the way, when I took over retail, there were 2 men that were running it before. So 2 men moved on. I became the head of retail, 1 woman. So all those dynamics were in play, right? And so you start to understand what's factual and what's emotional and how you start to deal with that. So one of the things that I do in the very beginning with my team and all of my, stakeholders per se, right? Everyone has stakeholders, is I met with them and tried to understand what their expectations were of me. And we wrote it down. What do they expect of me and what I should expect of them, right? Because it's a level playing field. What do they expect of me as their leader? What should I expect from them? It's a little bit what you and I were talking about before in terms of understanding the expectations. And once we understand that, can we agree to those expectations, right? Because someone might tell me, well, I expect that you're going to leave me alone and empower me and never ask me how my job is going because I want to be autonomous. Well, that's probably not going to happen, right? We're running a $1.6 trillion firm, publicly owned. We are all accountable together. So once we agree on those, then we move forward and I check in with them on a quarterly basis. How is this going? Are we working together? Am I meeting your expectations? Are you meeting mine? Not in a performance review. That's not what I'm saying. It's a conversation. And you adjust through that time. And that does help with getting to the norms faster, but you still go through storming. And that was a very unique situation that I had not intended to do during that time. I moved my family from Denver, Colorado. I have a husband, 31 years and 3 children, going through, middle school, high school during that time. It was a big, big change in my life, but I think we got through it and got through it successfully. And during that time, Schwab Retail really thrived. Our net asset growth was over 10% organically a year. And our customer service ratings were extremely high in terms of, all of the things that we're trying to accomplish through wealth management. So it worked, but it was unexpected, but we put things in place to make sure that people felt valued and respected during that time.
I love that. And I really think that's a huge give right there as far as like just tactically, like what do people expect out of each other, right? And then what I find also, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, it's like when I say what I expect or you say what you expect, I'm like, do we actually understand what those words mean? Right? Because sometimes like people will use the same words and they have different thoughts of what they mean, which is the beautiful thing about language, right? So
that's why I say we wrote it down together. We both got a copy and we made sure we understood what that meant. And the other thing I find, Darius, really works is that, we're all adults in this relationship. If we agree to something, then we agree together to do it. It's not anyone telling anyone what to do. It's a mutually agreed upon decision. And that way we hold each other and ourselves accountable. And it should reduce some of the friction. It doesn't eliminate it. We're all human beings. We all want what's best. And so valuing those opinions in the process is important.
What do you think? One of the things that's fascinated me about your heritage in growing up in the business from really an advisor all the way to such a huge executive position, and then now juxtaposing that as an entrepreneur in more or less we're in a startup, right? One of the things that has fascinated me about both you and Joe is when I think of those large organizations, I even think of my last organization when we got to about 1,000 people. And I was CEO of the company, and I was like, man, naturally what ended up happening was politics kind of came into play. Whenever I think of like bigger organizations, and I think that a lot of listeners who are entrepreneurs are like, oh, I hate, that's why I became an entrepreneur. Like, I don't want to deal with that stuff. How did you approach that as a female executive in a male dominated industry? And then B, you seem to me like a conscious leader, someone that's like heart centered, heart forward. And it feels like a lot of that stuff kind of maybe is at odds with that type of just the way I see you as a human. Like how did you deal with that?
Well, first and foremost, you have to be really clear on your own personal values. Like what are your values? How do you clarify those and how do you live up to them? Things like honesty, integrity, clarity, trust, openness. You have to be really clear that this is what I stand for. And once you know those, it really guides your behaviors, even in difficult situations. And so that's one of the things that I've been blessed with in my life. My parents were very clear on their values. I believe most of those have rubbed off on me. And so as I've worked, and many times, Darius, many times, I've been in rooms with only men, and I'm the only woman. And I ran a fairly large P&L in public companies as well as private firms. And so throughout my life, I saw this. And in particular, this is very unique in the wealth management space. I think other industries have done a much better job, and I think we're getting there. But it is true. So in those situations, and I kind of have a funny aside story to tell you, because I have this vision, because I do think the world is better. I do think the industries are getting better. And because it's for business reasons. It's not just because, okay, well, let's put some women or, underrepresented organizations or people into the room just because we want to look good. That cannot be the reason. It has to be representing your clientele. But I have this vision of showing in a museum someday, the San Francisco MoMA, of some of the pictures of a boardroom, right? Think about a boardroom with a mahogany table. And when I worked at USA, believe me, these were dark boardrooms with like kind of bunkers in them, right? Because it's a military presence and it's one woman and 10 or 15 men. Think of that picture and having that picture, blue shirts, ties, and then, maybe a colorful shirt like this, right? Think of that juxtaposition in a display in a museum 50 years from now, and people going through that saying, wow, is that what it was really like? And I'm going to become some artifact somewhere, right? Because people will not believe that this actually took place for a long time, because more and more women, more and more ethnic people are graduating from college. They're going into business, they're going into law school, they're going into medical school. Like the world is changing dramatically. And so I really have this vision that this will happen. And we're going to be able to go to the MoMA and see it. And young people will go, wow, we've come a long way. And I'll be happy that we did that, again, for business reasons. So what do I do in those situations? I always assume positive intent, right? So one of my values is to assume positive intent. So if I'm in a room and I'm the only woman and someone says something, I'm going to assume, okay, that was positive. Let me just reinforce that. Let me help this person understand how it might be viewed differently. And can I take an aside and just tell you a quick story?
Yeah, please.
So this has a lot to do with this because it's one of the things that I experienced in my career. I had a mentor very early in my career. Her name was Kathy Seifert, and this was in the mid 90s. She was the head of marketing at Kimberly-Clark. Okay, Kimberly-Clark, big firm, toilet paper. Mm-hmm. You can imagine many of their products, diapers, Huggies diapers, Kleenex, so on. She's the only woman in the room. She's actually showing me this story in the room at Kimberly-Clark. She is now presenting a marketing campaign on feminine hygiene products. Okay, let's just say that. We can say that because that's what they sell, and thank God they sell them. So but guess who she's presenting to?
A boardroom of men?
A boardroom of men, of 12 men in a room, and she's the only woman. And now they finally got a female in charge of the marketing plan for their feminine hygiene products. So she's doing this, and these men are telling her, no, I would do it this way. No, I would do it this way. No, that won't work. That won't work. And she showed me, I just looked at him and I said, and when was the last time you used these? Like, we need to understand what our users need, not what we think. We are not a focus group of one. We are all about representing our clients. And this is a true story. So the end of the day, when I've been in those situations, instead of thinking, well, this person doesn't understand or they're ignorant, I think about how do we represent our clients' views better in the financial services industry? And for women, are going to live longer than men. Facts are, not in every case, but that is the future. And 70% of women, when their partner dies, their spouse dies, will choose a different advisor. That is a fact. And so what's my role in our businesses and financial service to start to see the side of the other spouse who will be holding the money bag, in the next 20, 30 years. And so that story taught me to understand what the clients say, not so much get disturbed about what's said in a boardroom when I'm the only woman.
I love that. And then I think that that's like stakeholder management, right? And to your point, first of all, going back to the conversation about the MoMA, I'm like, Terri, I like to call Terri TK sometimes. I'm like, TK, I think I know what your hobby is going to be. Like, you got to be like an archivist and we'll call it like the boardroom series.
Yes.
I would love, like you reminded me when you said that of Mad Men, right? Like when people watch that show for the first time, I mean, I'm kind of in the middle, right? I'm young enough where like I wasn't alive when that happened, but I'm old enough where those are like my friends' dads and grandparents, right?
That's
so I'm Gen X, and so when I watched it, I was like, oh yeah, like people smoking in the office, all men, being super sexist. Like, you're like, yeah, like I remember hearing stuff like that, and I do think that, my mom, who's a pretty hardcore feminist, she's like, yeah, like once they all die, then we won't be dealing with that anymore. And I'm like, my mom's also like pretty melancholy, but she's like, I just can't wait till they all. Yeah, you'll love my mom. She's amazing. She's like this like 71-year-old Italian lady that's a feminist that just like talks shit. But
I watched the one when you had her on your show and you were talking about your tomato sauce. She's an amazing woman, and I would love to meet her someday.
Yeah, let's do it when we're in SoCal. I'll have her come make us some spaghetti. My mom's the best. But yeah, like that's. I think that we're in this world right now. I think you and I talked about this once. Where I used to like sit in when I was CEO of my last business. I had pretty. Again, it wasn't like Charles Schwab's business, but it's 1,000 employees. So you have executives, and we were 50% of our executive team was of men and 50% were women. And it wasn't because we were trying to fill some quota. I'm like, look, 50% of the population is not a man. And obviously there's like a bunch of stuff about like what gender is now. But the reality is like, there should be a 50% chance that the best person for the job is not a man, right? Like that just like is mathematically probable, right? And so I would hear some of these old school guys just like, only talk in male like him, he, like talking about like everything, and it drove me insane. I'd pull them aside. I'd say like, guys, you need to stop saying that, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that it creates, like, first of all, it's a bias that is not true, and number two, like, you're alienating people. Like, how did you deal with that in the world, or what do you think leaders need to do? Like, just have an awareness about it, correct? Like, what's the way to do it where it doesn't feel confrontational but feels additive? Because I think that that's a really important part of creating diversity in the workplace.
Yeah, in my career, I've always tried to find partners, friends, comrades that would help me in meetings. And most of the time they were male, right? Because if I was one of two, women in a boardroom, I needed to find trustworthy friends that were male that could help me make sure that my language was working, but also help their peers, right? So I never did it all alone. Because you can't make a change on your own alone. You always have to find trusted people that, I worked in a military firm, USAA. We always talked about being in the foxhole, right? You have someone in the foxhole that you trust explicitly, that you work with, that you would move mountains for. And so I always found those people. I was very fortunate to have those people in my career, and I'm grateful for them now. We still stay in touch today, where I would share with them, here's my thought. And I'll tell you a story. I mean, there's so many great stories, I think, but there was a time about, I'd say 10 years ago, after the George Floyd issue that happened in Minnesota, and that was real and it was very difficult. Well, during that time, the head of the Financial Government Affairs Committee in Washington sent a letter to the major financial firms across the country and said, hey, we need to see your diversity statistics. Like, this is an issue. And this was, when DEI was really evolving. And I was in the room when this happened and the letter came in, and there was a lot of debate in the room, right? There's a lot of people saying, forget it, don't answer. That's not the issue. There's a lot of people saying, we should answer. This is important. But I looked at my comrades that I knew would say something, and they're like, well, here's the situation. Here's how we're going to assume positive intent. And here's how I recommend we proceed by filling out this form and really owning our statistics, owning what we have today and pledging to ultimately get better over time. And I didn't have to tell them to do that. They knew, and I could help support. But if it was the only woman in the room saying, I think we should do this, that might be a little more challenging, right? So in politics or situations, remember, people are people. They need friends. They need comrades. They need people they can trust. I needed that. They needed that. And I think that made a big difference during that time, that we could all collaborate on that together.
I love that. It's funny, so you don't know this, but when I'm doing the show, I try to name the show like before. I sometimes change it, which I actually just did tweak the title for your show, but I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you what the new title is. The first title, which I'm going to tell you what it is right now, is really a big part of how I see you, and it was one of the reasons I besides loving you, I was like thinking you're amazing. I wanted you on the show because of this, and I think it's something that I've observed that I think that our audience really is already they're hearing it right now as you talk. But I wrote Terri Kallsen, Leading with Excellence. And the reason I say that is, like, I've worked with a lot of people, and that last word in that sentence is what I think of when I think of you. Like, you're a person that just has super insane high standards, and you hold yourself accountable to them, and you motivate those around you to level up to that. What do you think that is, and like, how do you think others can lead with more excellence? Because there's no question in my mind why you've done what you've done in your career, and why you continue to do what you do with your career. And it's that last word. And I think there's such an opportunity for people these days to have more of that. Could you give us your thoughts on that?
First of all, I appreciate that. And that's very kind. I've always thought of myself as a person in process. And I read the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, very early on. And it really talks about, private victories and public victories, right? And private victories are about things you're really trying to accomplish that others may not know about, right? Like you might, I've run 21 marathons. Well, when I first started running, and I could barely run 2 miles. It was after my first child, the first pregnancy. I didn't tell anyone about that because that was a private victory. And I ran 2 miles and I ran 5 miles and I ran 15 miles. Those were private victories. There are other things that I'm working on, listening better. When I go to a meeting, I might say, okay, I'm not going to say anything for the first 10 minutes unless someone asks me. I'm not going to appear disgruntled, but I'm really going to just listen. And when I do it, I have a little private victory. Nobody else knows except for me, but I am celebrating inside. And then I have some public victories that we win as a team. And I recognize those are public victories and everyone knows about it and everyone feels good. So in that time, I'm a person in process during both, and I'm working on things inside to get better for people outside. And so I view that as a continuous journey and never ever achieved, but always working because the world is always changing. So I may have high expectations of myself because I want people to see who I am and how I can help them. But that's really the journey I'm on because I really want our team, the Rise Growth team, to win together. And so I'm setting clarity for myself to be a part of that really high performing team that we have at Rise Growth with you and Joe and the whole team. But most of the time, Darius, I'm really thinking about what I can do to support that vision and mission long term, and then publicly celebrating the team.
I love that. That's being someone that gets to work with you. I may, like, nothing you said surprised me, but I thought the audience could hear it because I think so many times people use that word. I don't want to say frivolously, but like a little bit. I'm like, no, like excellence is hard. It's hard to do. And you're just such a great person at it. So anyway, I appreciate that. I know we're getting close here to the end of the show, but I have a couple other questions and we're going to get to the greatness question in a few minutes here. But before we get there, like you're a person that worked like not as an entrepreneur until this is like this new chapter of your career. So I think a lot of times people can be intimidated by entrepreneurship, which rightfully so. It's hard, and there's a statistic that 94% of people will fail at being an entrepreneur. And that's a real number. So 6% of the population are actually wired to do it. Probably for good reason. It's hard. It's volatile. A lot of ups, a lot of downs. Like you can not make money for a long time. So I get it. I've been doing it for a long time. What do you think for yourself? Like when you start looking up this transition from working at the highest of high levels in an executive capacity at a publicly traded company to, doing the highest of high mid-market level to now coming into entrepreneurism, what's like your biggest like surprises? What are your biggest aha moments? What I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on just the transition and what you've gotten so far.
Sure. Well, first of all, I wouldn't have done this had it not been for you and Joe leading the way when it comes to entrepreneurship. So I'm an entrepreneur, but at least I have some really good mentors and sponsors in the process, and I'm learning a lot as I go. So I feel really lucky that this is my phase of entrepreneurship, that I'm not totally alone. And we've got an incredible team with us. Some of my learnings are, there is the CEO format that you've created as a part of your prior company. When we meet, the rigor of our meetings in terms of the results, the highs, the lows, and then the process and the accountability that we build for each quarter. I have to tell you, even at sometimes the highest levels of any publicly traded firm, they don't necessarily have that, right? And it's not necessarily as engaging and as ongoing as I've seen. So that was a learning for me, a really good learning, a surprise as well, because we're creative, we're innovative, but we have a structure and accountability around it, which I think is the perfect magical combination, is that entrepreneurs can be creative. We can create the way, but we still have a structure of accountability. So that was a big surprise for me. And then the second thing is, in this particular role at Rise Growth, one of the reasons why I love it is that we get to work directly with advisors and their teams. And because of my background, with advice and with planning. And really my favorite part of any job I've ever had, be it at USAA, Schwab, or Wealth Enhancement Group, has been the work with advisors. That I, as an entrepreneur now, get to combine this creative side that I get to really understand and help with advisors, making their jobs better, supportive, and helping more clients. I always say serving more clients, meeting more needs. That has been the best combination for me. And that, for me, that's where I feel like I have the highest fulfilling of giving back to this industry. And so I couldn't be happier in this role and working with both you and Joe and the team.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. First of all, I appreciate the kind words, and feelings mutual. One other question though, like, having come into, obviously, like, there's a lot of positivity there. Like, what's like is there anything where you're like, oh man, that was a surprise? Like, just for people that are thinking about going into entrepreneurism, I think number one, I think it's romanticized, right? Right. And now more than ever, you see people like, I just read today, like Mark Zuckerberg, the second richest person on earth. Right.
Yeah, I saw that too.
And like people like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and, Mark Cuban, and you got Shark Tank and you got Dragon's Den, you got all these things where there's a romanticized part of being an entrepreneur. And then the inverse of that is it's like, you kind of get your ass kicked a lot too, and I think that's not, I actually think that it happens in corporate America too, but you have like the safety of the harbor of the corporation to like actually kind of pretend a little bit that it's a little bit less volatile, and there's a price you pay for each. What has there been anything for you from like, if you were to like not romanticize, like for the non-romantic, for where you're like, hey, anyone that's thinking about going into entrepreneurism that hasn't done it before, you're like, this is something you need to be real about, that maybe you didn't realize, or like a learning that you would like to share for people, just to say, hey, be honest with yourself that this is something you need to be ready for.
Yeah, for sure. What I would characterize that in terms of entrepreneurship is, in this role, is acting on fact, right? So act on fact. And I think a lot of times maybe entrepreneurs are a little more romanticized, even people in corporate America. I mean, you can take data and twist it any way you want to fulfill your story. But in entrepreneurship, in this particular role, you cannot manipulate data. You have to deal with the facts, good, bad, or ugly. And the reason why I say that is we have interviewed over 100 firms over the last year together, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some of these firms, at first glance, look fabulous leadership, fabulous clients, great advisors. But when we start digging a little deeper in some of the facts in terms of their full capability, their organic growth, their marketing, and their platform, some of the facts don't all line up. And then we have to say, we have to pass on it, right? Because we have to act on fact. And I would love to be serving 6 to 10 firms right now, but we have to act on fact because we're investing and we're sitting right beside them. And so the facts that they shared were helpful in the beginning, but the facts that we gleaned through more due diligence was even more, we understand it more. And then sometimes we have to take a pass, and it's hard to do. But what we give those firms is really information so they can do better. So maybe in the second round or the third round, when we're ready to go, they might be a candidate. And that's never an easy thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally appreciate that. I know we're running short on time. Terri and I have a meeting we have to get to. So, Terri, people that want to, I want to go to the greatness question. So we'll run there quickly in a second. But before we go there, how can people like connect with you, learn more about the work you're doing? If they wanted to reach out, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Sure. I'm on LinkedIn, Terri Kallsen, or my email is terri@risegrowth.com. I have to tell you, working for such large firms all of my life, this was the easiest email I've ever had. And so I'm sticking with it. So terri@risegrowth.com.
So I got to tell you quickly that I always, when I start a company, I'm like, we have to only do first names. And then as the company grows, then you get the dot last name. And then you know who the early people were. So yeah, that's by design. All right. You ready for the greatness question? And we'll get going?
I am.
All right, Terri, what is the number one barrier to creating greatness that you've overcome in your life, and how have you overcome it?
Well, in terms of the barrier, I mean, it's really about overcoming hurdles in life. And I'll just share with you, when I got my CFP, during that time, we were moving to San Antonio, Texas. I had 3 kids. My youngest daughter was 3 months. And I had to take that exam with about 40 people who worked for me at the time. And this was really when it was back pencil and paper. And when I took it, I was surrounded by people. And my boss said to me, well, if you don't pass, we'll have to consider your job, right? That was incredibly terrifying. I moved my family to San Antonio. I had young children. My husband decided to stay home with our kids. We decided that together. And so that barrier was passing that exam and having the perseverance and resiliency to take that on. Luckily, the end of the story is I passed. But during that time, that was probably the most stressful time in my life. And this is another story, is I had to go to an exam prep, which was a week long in Austin, Texas, which I know you live. And I had iritis during that time. Iritis is an inflammation of your eye where you cannot see, and I had a fever, and I was sick while I was taking this exam prep. Luckily I passed, but that was a huge barrier. But resilience and trust and hard work gets you through anything.
Oh my gosh, Terri, you're amazing. I love you and appreciate you. And I'm so grateful to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank
you, Darius. Have a great day.
All right, everybody. Until next time, peace out. We love you. You are listening to The Greatness Machine, and that's a wrap for today. Listen, if you love what you heard, subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform that you're tuning in on so that you don't miss any of our future episodes. We have tons of great people coming on, and we're stoked to have you here to enjoy it with us. Leave us a review. Tell us what you love most about this particular episode. We love getting the reviews. We love to see what you guys love most. And if this particular episode, made you think of someone who's leveling up in their business and in their life, print screen, share it with them. Leaders are the best givers. And after all, we're all here to support and grow with each other. And in case you want to see some of the fun behind the scenes shots or some of the things that we're doing, I'm actually writing about this in my weekly newsletter. Go to www.therealdarius.com and subscribe to my newsletter. We're talking about fun things like business and life and mindfulness and cryptocurrencies and gosh, I don't even know, everything and anything, but it's tons of fun stuff I write about. I try to get it out on a weekly basis. You can subscribe at www.therealdarius.com. And with that said, look, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you. I love you. Peace. We're out of here. See you guys on the next one.
She's my lover.